Now first and foremost, and before we get started, and it's a little bit late this, and mostly thanks to this guy here, Happy New Year and Lang May Your Lum Reek. Now, if you do need a translation for Lang May Your Lum Reek, I will drop it down into the description. Might even pop one up here for you because it's an important Scottish greeting at this time of year. And despite the fact that we're a good fortnight into 2024, I can't move on with it until I get the pickups from 2023 out of the way. So if you're interested in seeing what I picked up in the latter part of 2023, and let me tell you, there is a little bit of something for everyone in there, and you just wait until after these. So as I said in the introduction, I do have a little bit of something for everyone, and that means there's probably quite a bit to go through here. Now I'm going to stick to my normal format. I'm going to show you the newer stuff first and work my way back to that juicy retro at the end. But a slight caveat, because I do have some hardware pickups and I'm going to start with them. And the first hardware pickup that I'm going to show you today, that came for Christmas for me anyway, was this wonderful Atari 2600 Plus. Now I can't speak for you, but for me the Atari 2600, or as we like to call it back in the day, the Atari, was such a hugely important piece of hardware. Before the Atari 2600 managed to slip into my life somewhere around 1981, the only two other ways that I could get access to video games were Pong clones and arcade cabinets. Now of course, as much as I would have loved back then as I would now to have a full-size arcade cabinet such as Defender, Space Invaders or Pac-Man, that was and is still now not a possibility. And although the ports of those arcade games to the Atari 2600 weren't always spectacular, if you were around cutting your teeth on video games back then, this was absolutely a must-have item, and without a doubt it made you the king of the playground. Now along with the Atari 2600 Plus, I did also get the 4 games in 1 cartridge and the paddle controllers, which comes in a separate pack. And if you're looking at picking up an Atari 2600 Plus yourself, I would highly recommend that you get the paddle pack as well, because not only does it come with 4 other games, it comes with 2 paddles, and it adds that multiplayer fantasticness that you loved back in the late 70s and early 80s. So that's the Atari 2600 Plus and the paddle pack coming into the collection, and it's going to send me down a rabbit hole collecting old Atari cartridges again, so there is that. Now next up for the hardware pickups, I've decided to throw myself back into PC gaming. Well, not quite, but you'll see what I mean in a minute, because I decided to pick myself up a Steam Deck. Now as much as the Steam Deck is a fairly capable handheld PC, that's absolutely not the reason I decided to pick it up. The reason that I've decided to pick up a Steam Deck is to play much older console games, but on a handheld machine that I can take anywhere. Now for anyone who's not familiar with the Steam Deck, there are plenty of applications that you can install onto your Steam Deck to play old retro video games. For me personally, I will be taking images of all my PlayStation and PlayStation 2 games directly from the original disc, and then putting those images onto the Steam Deck where I can play those games whenever, wherever I like. Of course, I also picked up a dock for the Steam Deck so I can output from HDMI to a much larger screen, and as much as that's fun to do, for me the Steam Deck is going to be handheld. It's going to have my PlayStation and PlayStation 2 games on it, and it's absolutely going to help me cut through my backlog and finally get some of these games completed. So for anyone out there who's not only just interested in playing their old retro video games on a handheld system, a modern handheld system, but is also a little bit keen to preserve their video games, then the Steam Deck is definitely one option you should think about, and the Steam Deck is going to get used quite heavily in this household anyway. Next up is a mini console, because I do like the mini consoles as well, because they're a handy way to play older games on a modern TV, and I've been holding off on this one here just until the price dropped a bit, and I managed to get this for an absolute steal. It's the first Mega Drive Mini. Now I don't need to talk too much about the Mega Drive Mini, it's been out for quite a while now, and I would imagine most of you know what it's all about. I mean, it's been out so long, there's a Mega Drive Mini 2. And yes, the Mega Drive Mini 2 is definitely on my wish list for picking up in the near future, but when it comes to these minis, I do like to hunt them down for a reasonable price, and at the moment the Mega Drive Mini 2 is still a tad on the expensive side, well it is for me anyway. Now if the Mega Drive Mini is something that you've never personally thought about, but you do have a fondness for 16-bit games, then these mini consoles do have bang for their buck. There's a huge selection of games on them, and of course those pesky modders out there often find a way to get even more onto them. So that's the first Mega Drive Mini coming into the collection, where it will get played on a fairly regular basis, because it's not just a shelf ornament. Although it's a wonderful shelf ornament, it's not just a shelf ornament to me. I will get round to working through this library of games and seeing how well they compare to even original software on original hardware. Mega Drive Mini, I give it a thumbs up. Now next up we have something proper retro, or should I say proper vintage, because it's a controller. It's a controller for the PlayStation. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, a PlayStation controller isn't that interesting. Well, I managed to find one of these boys out in the wild. Now of course, if you're still thinking to yourself what's so special about that, it's just a Sony PlayStation dual analog controller. Well, if you take a closer look at it, you'll see it's slightly different, because this particular variant is the SCPH 1180, which I believe was Sony's first venture into dual analog sticks. And if you take a closer look at it, especially side by side with a more common dual analog PlayStation controller, you can quite clearly see a couple of differences. The first thing that you'll probably notice is the concave thumbsticks. Moving on from this model, they were all convex, and you know what, I think I prefer the concave to the convex for gripping these. Secondly, if you take a look at the hand grips, you can see that they're just ever so slightly longer than the more standard Sony PlayStation dual analog controller. And thirdly, if you take a look at the back, you can see the L2 and R2 triggers have nice little ridges to stop your finger slipping upwards and onto the bumper buttons. Now this model of the dual analog PlayStation controller doesn't have any rumble, but you know what, I hardly ever used rumble back in the day, and I hardly use it these days as well. So I've got this wonderful little kinda unique PlayStation controller into the collection, where it's going to live and be used and loved and not overused, because I want to keep this one as good as I can for quite a while. But there we go, the first iteration of the dual analog stick on a Sony PlayStation. Okay, so that's the hardware over, and we're moving on to the games, and like always I'm going to be starting with the newer games first, working my way back to the older games at the end, and we're starting with PlayStation 5, because I did pick up a few PlayStation 5 games over the last month or so. And the first one, a bit of a guilty pleasure, it's PGA Tour Golf. Now I can't speak for you, but the term guilty pleasure is something I don't really like to associate with video games. Now a lot of people will band about sports titles as guilty pleasures, but for me, where's the guilt in playing a video game that you enjoy playing? Now don't get me wrong, I don't play a lot of sports titles when it comes to video games, but if there is one genre of sports title that absolutely does hook me in and can slice quite nicely into my current collection without making me feel like I have to hide in a bunker, then it's definitely a golf game. Now I have been playing video golf games since the 1980s. One of my favourites of all time is World Class Leaderboard, but the PGA Tour games are absolutely fantastic. Well, they are for me anyway, but that's PGA Tour, Road to the Masters coming into the collection. It will get played on a regular basis, because golf games are just one of those games that I can sit down and wind down to and relax. It's comfort food gaming, and it's comfort food gaming at its finest for me. Now next up, and still for the PlayStation 5, is a game that I've been looking forward to getting into the collection for a little while now. It's only just out, it's still sitting on the backlog, and that game is Persona 5 Tactica. Now of course, if you know me, you know I absolutely love my JRPGs, whether that be turn-based combat or tactical turn-based combat. And of course, if you really know me, you know that I absolutely love Persona 5. So when Atlas shot out a new Persona 5 game, and not only that, a new Persona 5 game that is tactical turn-based, I pretty much couldn't empty my wallet quick enough. The only problem I have now is finding the time to sit down and play it, because there's so many games in the backlog, and I don't like to push anyone to the front, because games, they're not like children, you shouldn't have a favourite. But that's Persona 5 Tactica into the collection, and this will be getting played fairly soon, I would imagine. It's definitely coming off the backlog this year. Next up, and still with the PlayStation 5, we have a game that made it onto my top games of 2023. So a lot of you will already know that I own this game, I just haven't been able to show it off in a pickups video, but its time is now, and that is RoboCop Rogue City. Now I'm not going to speak too much about RoboCop Rogue City, because hopefully I'll be able to sit down and put together a decent review of this game. And of course I should, because it was my number 2 game of 2023. All I'm going to say to you, if you haven't played this yet or haven't picked it up and you're a fan of RoboCop, then this is a must-have game, because RoboCop Rogue City does exactly what it says on the tin. It's an absolutely perfect licensed game. It does everything that you would want a licensed game to do, and it doesn't do it badly like most licensed games tend tend to do. So RoboCop, Rogue City, my number 2 game of 2023. It's in the collection, it's definitely going to stay there, and this will be played more than once, so it won't just be sitting up on the shelf gathering dust. Trust me, it's that good. Now, last up for the PlayStation 5 is not just one game, but I believe 5 games, and it's all in a compilation, and if you know me, you know I do love a good compilation, but this one's extra special because it's the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection. Now, of course, I was absolutely stoked when Konami announced that this was going to be a thing. Like most people who played video games through the PlayStation years, Metal Gear Solid wasn't just a good game, it was a very unique game and an absolute masterclass in how to put together something original. Now, of course, this Master Collection contains games that go back earlier than Metal Gear Solid and pushes right through to Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. So whatever era of gaming you're a fan of when it comes to Metal Gear, or Metal Gear Solid as it is for me, then this is an absolute must to pick up, even if you've got it like I do on the PlayStation 3 with that collection. And I'm looking forward and crossing my fingers that we're going to get a Metal Gear Solid Master Collection 2, because there's some games buried in the PlayStation 3 and lost there to time that a lot of people haven't experienced that need to be on a modern compilation. Now, moving away from the PlayStation 5, we're going to drop down a generation and move on to a Nintendo console, and you'll know it's a Nintendo Switch because I say time and time again, I am truly, utterly falling for the Nintendo Switch, but I've only picked up one game over the last month or so for it, but it was an important one, and it's Super Mario RPG. Now, of course, I didn't play Super Mario RPG back in the day because I didn't have a Nintendo. My personal gaming journey went from the Atari 2600 to arcade cabs, onto the ZX Spectrum, the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis if you're from across the pond, DOS and Windows 95 PC gaming, and then onto PlayStation, and I was pretty much stuck on PlayStation from then right through to, well, almost now. We'll just say almost now. So of all the games that I wanted to experience back then that I didn't, Super Mario RPG was definitely one of them. So you're probably asking yourself, is this game still on your backlog? Well, no, it's almost finished. Well, I've almost finished with it, and it's been an absolute delight to play. Now, if you do have a Switch and you're thinking about getting Super Mario RPG, whether you've played it in the past or you're thinking about playing it now, then I can heartily recommend. This is a wonderful and splendid way to make a remake, and I wish Square would take a look at Final Fantasy VII. Now, I did like Remake, and I'll definitely pick up Rebirth and play that when it comes out, but it's not the remake we wanted. We wanted, well, the hardcore Final Fantasy VII fans wanted a remake of Final Fantasy VII like the way Nintendo have remade Super Mario RPG. So without a shadow of a doubt, this is one of the best games that I picked up last year, and I'm so looking forward to not only just finishing it off, and I don't have long to go, but replaying it just to remind myself how good a remake can be. Now we're moving away from Nintendo, but staying with the 8th generation and moving on to the PlayStation 4. And one game that I picked up over the last few weeks was a game that I've already picked up several times before, and I just can't help myself. It's Skyrim, but the Anniversary Edition. Now you may be asking yourself, why would you pick up Skyrim, the Anniversary Edition, when you have all the other copies of Skyrim that you've got up there from PlayStation 3 and including the PlayStation 4 port of that game? Well, quite simply, this one comes with an upgrade path to the PlayStation 5 and just adds a few bells and whistles. And I'll be frankly honest with you, it's pretty much like with Final Fantasy. If I see something with Skyrim on it or the Elder Scrolls, then I'm going to pick it up regardless whether I've got it, whether it's just a minor upgrade or whether it's just different box art. I mean, I'm not alone in that. I know there's a lot of people out there are just as obsessed with certain things as I can be with my RPGs and JRPGs. So Skyrim Anniversary Edition, which was running on the PlayStation 5 with a proper PlayStation 5 upgrade, into the collection, where it will definitely get played again because I play Skyrim all the time. Staying with the PlayStation 4, and it's another RPG that I picked up, or more specifically a JRPG, because that's my particular preference, and one with turn-based combat, and one that was recommended by my friend John over at Chicken Fillets. If you don't know him, there'll be a link in the description. Like anyone who's recommended me a game will get a link in the descriptions. But that game is Lost Sphear. Now, I don't know too much about the game at the moment. I have dipped in just to make sure that the disc works, and of course it does. And yes, it looks like another pretty little JRPG from Square Enix to sit in my collection. I will get round to playing it in full, but at the moment, of course, it'll have to be added to the backlog. But since Chicken Fillet said this was a game that I had to pick up, then I picked up Lost Sphere. Next up, still for the PlayStation 4 and still an RPG and still a JRPG, is a game that I don't know anything about. It's Indivisible. Now, as I said, I can't talk about this. I haven't played it yet. I haven't even put the disc in to make sure it works. I'm sure it does, but I just haven't get round to it yet, as this is one of the later acquisitions that's come into the collection. It is an RPG, it's an action-based JRPG, and it also has platforming according to the blurb at the back. Now, of course, if you're watching this and you've played Indivisible and you think I should bump it up the queue when it comes to the backlog, well, let me know that down in the comments. But at the moment, it's sitting in the backlog. It'll probably get played this year. No, it'll probably definitely get played this year because it's an RPG, and I'm quite curious to see the RPG and platform mechanics because I'm just coming off the back of Super Mario RPG, which is an RPG with platform mechanics. So Indivisible into the collection. Now we're moving down a generation and away from Sony back onto Nintendo because I have a selection of Wii games right here. Now, I didn't pick these games up for myself. This was a selection of the games that I won while watching the Heaps of Games charity Christmas stream, and I'm going to just show them all at one time because, as I said, most people know this stuff. I just wanted to see what came my way, courtesy of not only Heaps of Games but Gib84, and we have these here. Now, I'm not like Russ over at Retro Bear. I don't have a wall of Wii games, and quite frankly, the thought of having a wall of Wii behind me is something that puts me off the notion. Only joking, Retro Bear, we all love your wall of Wii, but there are plenty of Wii titles that anyone who collects video games, especially if they have a Wii, should have in their collection. And this bundle here has, of course, Wii Sports Resort, Mario Strikers, Red Steel, a game that I already have, so I'll be moving this one on, Mario Kart for the Wii, and you need Mario Kart on every iteration of Nintendo's consoles, so if you can get it, you got to get it. It's as simple as that. And of course, Rockstar's Table Tennis. That's right, the table tennis game made by Rockstar, just to see if that would generate any bad press. And you know what, some people did complain that it was too violent, and if you don't believe me, pop onto the internet, research yourself, and you will see there was at least one person who wrote to complain that table tennis from Rockstar was far too violent and distasteful, and maybe that was just because it was a sports game. Now, that is a lovely selection of Wii games there. It's Wii games that I didn't have except for Red Steel, which I do have. I will be moving on Red Steel, so if you're interested in it, drop down in the comments, let me know. I'll send it out to you free of charge, as long as it goes to a good home, and you can have yourself Red Steel. But the rest of them, I don't have them. They're important enough titles for me to keep, so I've almost got a wall of Wii, but they're in there now, and they'll be there forever, except him. Now we're sticking with the 7th generation, but moving over to Sony and the PlayStation 3. Only picked up a couple of PlayStation 3 games because I don't know why. I'm just not showing it as much love as I should be at the moment, but it's just a matter of finding the stuff out there in the wild. But one game that I did pick up was Game of Thrones. Now, I know absolutely nothing about the Game of Thrones game in the PlayStation 3. I know this is not the Telltale's game, which I have played. I believe this one will be much more action, hack and slash. Not usually my cup of tea, but it's a licensed game. It's from a license that I like, and it also has the possibility of being a bad game. And if you know me, you know I love a truly bad game, especially a bad licensed game. So Game of Thrones for the PlayStation 3 coming into the collection. I'll give it a quick go, see how it is, and it's either going to be a game I enjoy or it's going to be a truly bad licensed game. It's a win-win for me. Now, last up for the PlayStation 3 is another licensed game. This one I have no idea about either because I still haven't played it. I didn't play it back in the day, but it's a great license. It's 007 and this is Legend. And like I said, I don't know anything about it, haven't played it yet. If you want to talk about this game down in the comments, please do. Let me know whether I should be playing it sooner rather than later. All I know about it is it's got more than one James Bond in it, and that's an interesting sort of concept for me. The back blurb lets you know that you've got moments from Moonraker, Goldfinger, Die Another Day, and License to Kill, and even On Her Majesty's Secret Service, so there's some interesting Bond movies in there. I don't know what they're like when they play on a PlayStation 3, but I'll give it a go. It's in the collection now. Now we're staying with Sony, moving down half a generation and onto the PSP. And yes, the PSP wasn't a thing for me back in the day, despite being a Sony pony. It's just small screens on handhelds wasn't something that I was interested in back when the Sony PlayStation come out and the PS2, PS3 and onwards, I was an adult. I had my own home, had my own TV. I didn't need to sit in my bedroom and play video games anymore, so the handhelds, I didn't see a point to them. I see it now, I love them now, and I'm starting to build a collection. But the first PSP game that I've picked up, and I'm going to show you now, is Taito Legends Power Up. Now, I don't need to say anything about this particular compilation. It's Taito Legends, and I was an arcade kid back in the 80s, and whenever anyone throws out a compilation of classic 80s arcade games, I'm going to be all over it. It's as simple as that. Space Invaders was the first arcade game that I'd ever played. It was the second video game that I'd ever played after playing Pong on a Pong clone. So when I see compilations like this, it was a must pick up. And of course, when you were growing up in the 80s, you didn't get to see every arcade that was ever released. So compilations like this can introduce you to a game that you more than likely missed out on. And being on a handheld system like the PSP, well, it's easy just to pick up and play because it's arcade, and arcade's all about just dipping in, playing for a bit, enjoying yourself and getting on with it. So that's Taito's Legends Power Up into the collection, and it will definitely be played from time to time. Well, some of the games, especially the games that I haven't played before. And again, if you've played any of the games on this particular compilation and you think I should hit them up first, drop it down in the comments and I'll have a quick go. Next up, we're staying with the PSP, but we're moving back onto more of my comfort zone, my home turf, and that's another RPG or JRPG, and a tactical JRPG, and it's Tactics Ogre, Let Us Cling Together. Now, this is another game that I know virtually nothing about, so if you want to talk about it down in the comments, please do. Much like any other PSP games that you see me acquiring over the year, these are games that I just simply didn't have back in the day. Now, of course, it's a tactical JRPG, so it's absolutely not new gameplay for me. It's one I'll be able to probably slide into and get through quite quickly. But at the moment, I have no idea about the story, and when it comes to JRPGs, the story is king. Well, it can be. So was Tactics Ogre a game that you played back in the day on the PSP? If so, let me know. Let me know how quickly I should get round to playing this absolute gem of a game, and it's not really that expensive for what it is either. Tactics Ogre into the collection. I'm looking forward to playing this one. Next up is the last PSP game, and it's a game that I have to kind of thank Retro Rivals, because it's a game that I wouldn't have picked up regardless because of a game that wasn't released over here in PAL territories. Now, the game that wasn't released was Parasite Eve. I mean, we got Parasite Eve 2 on the PlayStation, just didn't get the first one. Thanks to Scott and Jen over at Retro Rivals, they sent me along not only a copy of the game Parasite Eve, but a PlayStation 2, an NTSC PlayStation 2 for me to play the game on, and because of that, I can now go on with my Parasite Eve journey, and I picked up the Third Birthday. Now, I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record because I haven't played the Third Birthday, so I don't know anything about it. I don't know about the story, I don't know even about the gameplay mechanics. All I know is it's part of the Parasite Eve universe, and thanks to Scott and Jen, I'm now ready to go balls deep into that particular franchise. So if there's anyone out there that recommends I get round to the Third Birthday as soon as possible, then drop that down in the comments because it's in the collection. I'm looking forward to playing it just as soon as I finish off Parasite Eve, because I've already played through Parasite Eve 2. Should I play this sooner or later? Question for you. Next up, we're moving away from the consoles and onto the PC, and anyone who's been paying attention has noticed, of course, what I said at the beginning. We're going to be starting with the newest games and working our way back to that juicy retro at the end, and considering the games that have just been up, we're probably sitting around the year 2000. And what game from the year 2000 on the PC did I need to get back into the collection? Well, it's a game that I had in the collection and lost the disc for, because it's The Sims. Now, I absolutely loved The Sims back in, 99, 2000. I put so many hours into it, like so many people who had a PC did as well. And I know my good friend Lady Lacey over at Do You Nerd absolutely loves The Sims, and she'll be glad to see the original Sims coming back into my collection, where I can sit there, I can cheat my way through it, because everybody's got to have a bit of Rosebud in their life, but just have an absolute blast with a game that just on paper shouldn't be fun. It is, of course, one of the most fun games I've ever played, and that's not just down to the fact that you can put someone in a swimming pool, remove the ladder and slowly watch them die. But unless you've played it, you probably don't know these things, and if you haven't, then I recommend to you, if you get the opportunity to play The Sims and you've never played it before, then please do. I would be wary of asking you to look at the more modern iterations of The Sims, because quite frankly I didn't really get on with those, but the original Sims back in 99, 2000, absolutely fantastic, poured so many hours into it. It's back complete into the collection again, and hopefully it won't take up too much of my time and stop me getting through some of the backlog that I need to get through as well, because this is just never ending fun. So that was the only PC game that I picked up, and I don't pick up a lot of PC games anymore because there's easier ways to get them in this modern day and age, especially the types of games that I tend to play in the PC, which are games usually from 1988, maybe 87 through to 95, and after that 95 cut off, didn't really play much in the way. There was one or two examples like The Sims, but other than that I didn't really touch them. So we're moving back to consoles, however, so we are about the 2000s, so you take a guess at what console we're moving on to next. Take a guess, considering that I'm a Sony pony. And yes, Rudgy Retro Gamer's going to be happy. A new green spine's in with DSX Invisible War. Now I wish I could tell you about Invisible War. I have never played Invisible War. Also, the original DSX on the PlayStation 2 is another game that I haven't played yet. It is of course sitting on my backlog like this is, and I probably wouldn't have looked at them in the past had it not been for DSX Human Revolution being such a fabulous game and making me want at least to pick up the older games just to have a look at them eventually. Now if I had all the time in the world I would sit down and make my way through all these games, but I just don't have that time at the moment. I will at some point in life, but until then they'll just have to sit on the shelf and hopefully move their way up the backlog list and towards the I've played it list. So that's DSX Invisible War for the Xbox, and only on Xbox, which is one of the few things that I collect Xbox for, that only on Xbox. Rogie, there you go, another green spine into the collection. You have been a big influence in that, but don't influence me too much. So let's move away from the big mean green machine and back to my home turf of the Sony PlayStation 2. And the first game that I picked up, or one of only two that I picked up for the PlayStation 2, I know, shock, horror, most of you out there will be thinking there'll be a pile of about 40 or not, but no, just two, and the first one is Maximo. Now Maximo, if you don't know, is the spiritual successor to Ghosts and Goblins. Or at least so they say. I haven't played it myself, so I don't know how true that is. I did, however, based on that information, have to pick it up. I also had to pick it up because it's a PlayStation 2 game, and I am on a quest to have as many PlayStation 2 games as I can possibly get into my collection. So if you want to talk about Maximo, drop that down in the comments. Let me know if I should be playing it. Let me know if it's as good as Ghosts and Goblins or Ghouls and Ghosts or whatever iteration of that particular gem you played. But Maximo's in the collection and it's going to stay there forever, ever, ever. As I said, only two games for the PlayStation 2, and the next one is another RPG because yes, as well as being a Sony pony, I'm a bit of a JRPG nut, and I picked up Jade Cocoon 2. Now I haven't played Jade Cocoon, so I haven't played Jade Cocoon 2 because I do like to play things in order. Now of course I've got a cheek saying that since I introduced myself to Final Fantasy through Final Fantasy VII, but so did most of the Western world. Now does that mean I'm not going to get round to playing Jade Cocoon 2 before I pick up Jade Cocoon 1? Then probably not. I'm not so much of a stickler in those old ways, so if it does manage to bump its way up the backlog, which will only happen if you drop into the comments and let me know I should play Jade Cocoon 2 as soon as possible, then Jade Cocoon 2 could most definitely be played before Jade Cocoon. Now of course you could also drop into the comments and tell me not to play Jade Cocoon 2 until I've played Jade Cocoon 1, but what would be the point in that except for forcing me out into the wild to find myself a copy of Jade Cocoon so I could finally get round to playing Jade Cocoon 2. So Jade Cocoon 2 in the collection. Should I play it? Should I play it soon? That's all down to you. And that was the last of the PlayStation 2, so we're moving down a generation onto the PlayStation, and what a console the PlayStation was. It was the machine that dragged me away from being a PC gamer. I was almost a part of the exclusive PC master race, but the PlayStation dragged me away from that. Now the first game that I picked up for the PlayStation is Tony Hawk's Skateboarding. Now of course many people from across the pond will say that's not Tony Hawk's skateboarding, it's Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, or Pro Skater 1 if you want to add that 1 onto a game that didn't have the 1 on back in the day. But for some reason over here in the UK we get Tony Hawk's skateboarding, and I don't know why Pro Skater was used for Pro Skater 2 and Pro Skater 3. Maybe they just didn't think we knew about skateboarding or being a pro skater over here in Europe back in the day. Now I haven't played Tony Hawk's Pro Skater or Tony Hawk's skateboarding because my introduction to the series was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, a game that I absolutely adore, but despite everyone who plays it now says muscle memory takes over, well it certainly doesn't for me with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. I would certainly have to sit down and put many hours into it to get as good as I was back in the day, but I had to get the first one into the collection. I will be looking for the second one as well. Tony Hawk's Skateboarding Pro Skater into the collection, where it will live forever and beside its brethren. Next up for the PlayStation we have one of the prettiest platforming games that you'll ever play, because that game is Rayman. Now Rayman was a game that I had back in the day, and it was one that moved on, because that's what we did with our games back in the day. We bought them, we played them for a while, we loaned them out, lost them, or even traded them. There was many ways to lose a game back in the 90s, so of course anytime I'm out there in the wild and I see something that I had back in the day that I no longer have, then I've got no option but to pick it up, and Rayman falls exactly into that category. Now anyone out there who hasn't played Rayman, then I thoroughly recommend that you go get yourself a way to play this game, because it truly is stunning, especially for the time it came out. So Rayman, back into the collection. Got to love that game, it's so pretty, the sound is fantastic. Get it played if you haven't played it. Next up, and still on the PlayStation, is another game in the same vein as Rayman, a game that I had back in the day, don't have it anymore. Well, I do now, because that game is Grand Theft Auto. And let me tell you something about Grand Theft Auto. You have Grand Theft Auto, Grand Theft Auto 2, even the London expansion pack, and you have San Andreas. Any other game in the Grand Theft Auto franchise I just really don't care too much about at all. And yes, I know I'm going to get a lot of hate in the comments about not really caring too much about Vice City, but hey, I grew up in the 80s and it was a bad time for people who actually lived there, and we don't want to be reminded. San Andreas of course was in the glorious 90s and things were starting to look a bit better. But Grand Theft Auto, the first game, the little game that spawned them all, well, it's into the collection where it belongs again, and I'm looking forward to taking this out for a spin again, because it's a fun little experience. If you haven't played it before and you like the modern games, give it a try, just see where Grand Theft Auto came from. And last up for the PlayStation is another game that I had back in the day that I no longer have, except it's here now, and that game is Gallions. Now I'd love to talk more about Gallions, but I honestly can't remember too much about it. I remember the main character waking up in some sort of hospital bed, some sort of medical facility. I remember the character having some sort of psychic power, and I think I remember the main character having to inject himself with some sort of compound to boost those psychic powers. And I also remember absolutely loving the game, so much so I added it to my top 10 games that I must get back into the collection. But as I said, this is almost going to be fresh for me when I play it, or I think it will be, or maybe all the memories of Gallions will come flooding back once I start playing it. Either way, it's a win for me. It's a piece of nostalgia that I can't explain, and I'm sure if you know about this game and you want to drop down into the comments anything that might just jog the memory. Maybe I was injected with some sort of compound that made me forget Gallions. Who knows? Stranger things have happened. Okay, so that's the PlayStation out of the way, and we're not dropping down a generation, we're dropping down a couple of generations, because we're moving on to Generation 3, and the first Generation 3 game I've picked up is a Sega game, so that obviously means it's Master System, and it's Alex Kidd and Shinobi World. And I have no doubt whatsoever that Ollie over at 8-Bit Boy UK and Clint over at Retro Rewind will be absolutely ecstatic that I am continuing to pick up Master System games. Now, the Master System wasn't a console that I had for myself back in the day. I had to rely on playing other people's Master Systems. So as an adult in 2024, it's nice to be able to go back and pick up all the Master System games that I didn't own for myself back in the day. Alex Kidd, who tried his very hardest to be the Sega mascot that he never turned out to be, did have have some fabulous games, and Alex Kidd and Shinobi World is no exception to that. It truly is Alex Kidd in a world inspired by the Shinobi games, and it's as balls hard as the other Shinobi games are. And despite Alex Kidd being marketed more towards children, they didn't let up on how hard it was, let me tell you, because this game has kicked my backside many a time. But will it be able to kick it now in 2024? Well, we won't know until I play it, and 2024 is going to be the year of the game, or so has been announced by Russ over at Retro Bear. And yes, that's the second mention of the Retro Bear today, because he wants us to play more games on YouTube, and this is going to be one of the games that I will be playing on YouTube. Alex Kidd and Shinobi World, happy to have it in the collection. I'm not so sure how happy I'll be when it's handing me my backside on a regular basis. Now, that was the only Master System game that I picked up, and we are staying with that generation, and we're moving on to Nintendo, so that obviously means the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES, or as we called it back in the day, the Nintendo, which some adults still call every video game console. And the first game that I picked up for the NES was The Simpsons, Bart vs the Space Mutants. Now, this was a game that I did play back in the day, and yes, I know it's a truly horrible game, but because I did play it back in the day, and of course it's a Simpsons game, there is a little corner of my heart where nostalgia sort of rules, and this game just had to eventually come into the collection, which is a shame because I don't collect heavily for the NES, so if I'm going to fill it up with games like this, I'm not going to have very many good games. So let me know down in the comments what games for the NES that should be coming into the collection. Games better than Bart vs the Space Mutants would be good, so then in the comments let me know must have NES games. But for the moment, Bart has his place here. Now, next up and last for the NES is a game that's going to have Stu over at Tutti UK. Absolutely delighted with my particular pickup, because not only is it a Nintendo game, it's also a Nintendo game that's come with some cardboard, and Tutti loves his cardboard. For me, it was Russian Attack. Now, it's hard for me to look at this game and call it Russian Attack, because we all know over here, and even in the arcades, it was called Green Beret. And Green Beret was one of those games that not only kicked my arse in the arcades, it kicked my arse in the ZX Spectrum. But what about the NES? Now, I have absolutely no doubt that this game is going to be brutal. It's going to put me through my paces, but let me know in the comments if this is a hard game, a game that you played back in the day that absolutely brutalised you, or is it perhaps easier than the arcade port, or have you played the other ports of Russian Attack, aka Green Beret, that you found to be harder than the NES, because we all know NES is supposed to spell hard. But Russian Attack's in the collection now, and it's the only boxed complete NES game that I have. It's probably going to be the only boxed complete NES game that I have. The future ones probably cart only, because unlike Tutti, I don't care to pay double the money for a bit of Nintendo cardboard. So there you go, my friends, that was my pickups for the last part of 2023, and what did you think? Were there any games in there that you absolutely loved, or games that you missed out on, or have a piqued your interest? Is there any games in there that you knew nothing about and now you want to play them? If so, drop down in the comments, let me know, because interaction between you and me, well, that's what makes YouTube special. It does for me anyway. Thank you as always for watching, and until next time, cheerio. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to check out the other videos on offer here, and of course if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, feel free to do that as well. But most importantly, don't forget to leave a comment letting me know what you enjoyed most about this video. Any game, any console, any generation. Generation Pixel.